Praise be Jesus and Mary. Today, as you all know, we celebrate the feast of St. John Vianney. He's a priest who dedicated his life for the salvation of souls. We know that what great cost, if you've studied his life, you know how at great cost it was to him to have to stay in the same parish, many times requesting to be relieved of his duties so that he could, go and live a more contemplative life and weep and pray and do penance for his sins. He never did obtain that request. He would die at the helm, if you will. Because God, and his bishop rightly recognized as well, that God was calling him to this special, particular vocation. And yet he's held up as an example for all parish priests to follow, giving their lives for the faithful, spending time in the confessional. And it's something that we do need to encourage our friends, relatives, those around us, to make proper use of, the sacrament of confession, to come and, as it were, wash themselves in the blood of the Lamb. It's one of the things that we sometimes forget, that importance of confession. It's a great responsibility that a priest has. And Padre Pio even would say himself, at one time exhorting somebody, I think a priest who had been a little bit careless in the sacrament of confession. He said, "Do you not know that you are administering the blood of Christ?" There are grave obligations on both sides, both for the penitent as well as for the priest, and to make proper use of this sacrament. We know that the Church has both the bare minimum, which she tells us that we have to go, and yet we also are told by encouragement how frequently we should go. The frequent part of it is we learn from plenary indulgences. We would gain all our plenary indulgences. You basically have to go to confession once a month, more or less. Because one confession, as we know, covers about a time period of 20 days before, 20 days after. So it's more or less once a month, but you have a couple extra days there. And then you have also the minimum, which we know is if we've committed a mortal sin, once a year. We're bound, obliged, under grave, bound gravely to confess our sin once a year during the Easter season if we know that we've committed a mortal sin. I always encourage people, think of confession like it were a shower. And all the different times that you would want to go when you're going out with other people or your spouse, friends. Generally, we courteously will take a shower because otherwise we're afraid they might go, "What's that smell?" And we'd be very embarrassed. And yet, before God, sin stinks. You only have to read the lives of the saints who could see things from the more spiritual realm. St. Catherine of Siena, for example. She actually would tell the Pope when she was criticizing the papal court, the Pope asked her spiritual director, who does she think she is anyways? And she told one of the things she told the Holy Father, she says, "I can smell the sins in Siena better than those who commit them in Rome." So it gives you some idea just how bad the stench of sin can be. She could smell it all the way from Rome, in Siena. We do need to take, and this is part of why, the exhortation, confession is a spiritual bath. It's a washing. Even though we may not have mortal sins, we may only have venial sins. Maybe we are not aware of what our venial sins are. Well, we can still make a pious confession, bringing up some, sin from our past. And it's not a question of whether it's not a doubting that we're forgiven, but we know the matter for confession is sin. And so we can confess sins from the past just to renew our sorrow for those sins committed. And it's not necessarily like we, doubting the forgiveness, but it's a renewal of that sorrow. St. Alphonsus de Liguori encourages this for pious confessions. And it also safeguards the absolution. Because unless you confess a particular sin, you can't just come into confession and say, "Well, for all my sins against the fourth commandment." Generalizations are fine after you've gotten at least one particular sin. Then you can generalize. For all the sins of my past life. In particular, the one time I was disrespectful to my mom. The one time when I, maybe stole something. One time I didn't come home when Mom and Dad told me to come home. These little sins from the past that we can recall, It doesn't have to be a mortal sin. And then we can generally renew our sorrow for all our past sins. We don't have to enumerate every single one of them. But that safeguards the sacrament, or that safeguards the absolution that we're going to receive, so that we've confessed a particular sin so we can receive a valid absolution. And it's called a pious confession. Otherwise, we sometimes come to the confessional and, well, gee, Father, I can't think of anything I've done since yesterday when I went to my last confession, or a week ago. And it's not that you may not have committed a sin, but you can't think of anything. Nothing comes to mind. It happens. So this will help us, to get the absolution, to be able to receive our plenary indulgences, being able to apply those plenary indulgences not only for ourselves, but for the souls in purgatory. So to ask in a special way that, priests might encourage the faithful, and those of you who do make use of confession, that you might encourage others to make use of this sacrament. Finding words that were persuasive to help people to make use of this sacrament. So that every time we approach the table of the Lord, I remember Father Hardin actually telling us this himself. So you want to receive the most graces from our Lord in the Eucharist? Try even to go to confession right before Mass if it's possible. Let's just ring the doorbell, and we're not always there in the confessional, but you ring the doorbell and say, Father, I'd like to go to confession. So you start at 11:30, and that's good because it pulls me away and I don't get stuck doing something else. And that's good. We all prepare ourselves for the Holy Mass. May Our Lady help us to live holy lives, making use of this great gift that our Lord has given to us, so that we might more worthily receive Him in the Holy Eucharist. And it doesn't mean that we have to always go to confession before every Mass, but it's a nice thing to do. Pious exercise if we're able to do it, but at least once a month. At least that. May Our Lady help us to make this resolution so that we might always be pleasing in our Lord's sight and always strive to grow more holy and zealous in serving the Lord. Praise be Jesus and Mary.